All right, so here we go. This is the Lunch and Learn for the Southwest Washington Grain Project with NABC's Southwest Washington Regional Director Jake Fay and NABC Executive Director Mike Peroni. Everybody is welcome. There will be a Q&A session after they present. They'll present for about 25 to 30 minutes. And after that time, there will be a Q&A. If you have a question during the presentation that's just hot on your mind and you don't want to lose it, please pop it in the chat. And after we are done, I will make sure that that question is relayed to Mike and Jake and that it gets answered in that Q&A session. And with that, I would like to hand it off to Mike and Jake.
Oh, thank you, Emily. I'm gonna start today, and then I'm gonna hand the baton to Jake about midway through. My name is Mike Peroni, Executive Director of the Northwest Agriculture Business Center, and here today to share out about the Southwest Washington Green Project, which is honestly how I was introduced to NABC several years ago. I mean, it's honestly the reason that I'm sitting here today. So I'm gonna take you on a brief trip from sort of why this happened and the magic that occurred early on, along with some early funding opportunities, and walk us through right up into kind of being shovel ready. And then Jake's going to take over and talk a bit about production. We've had an excellent production history and had some very poignant challenges to production this year that he will talk about as well. So I am absolutely delighted with how many people have shown up today, and very pleased to be able to talk about a project that is so close to my heart on a personal level. I think you'll soon find out that I am not the number one best at doing PowerPoints in Zoom. But Emily, if I can get the thumbs up, that'll let me know that everyone's seeing the first slide. Excellent. The history of this initiative or project is really around Southwest Washington. There were a lot of unique challenges occurring in the Chehalis Basin. We had consistent, or at least recurring, catastrophic flooding. There were market challenges in that both National Frozen Foods and Simon's Frozen Foods shuttered their vegetable processing facilities. I believe, and it's just great to have Dave here to check my accuracy on this, but the last Western Washington contracts for processing vegetables would have been in 2018.
Sounds right.
And yeah, got the confirmation nod. And it's I think it's easy, depending on what your background is in regional agriculture, to suggest that, oh, these large processors, they're paying substandard pricing and there's no way to make a living and the margin is too slim. And I don't know that I would completely disagree with that, but I have been taken to school in this area. There are many mid-tier farms that have built a relationship with these processors over the course of generations. And in some cases, I think people are very quick to point out that those relationships were good until they were not. This slide I love. This is a peek behind the curtain. We had early meetings because of the loss of these contracts, because regional growers were struggling to find a replacement market. Dave Fenn, who we refer to as an agricultural provocateur, and others were creatively seeking additional markets. And one of those were some pilot projects that were through Valley Agronomics for sale of for production and sale of malting barley to Great Western, located down in Vancouver. And those started as early as 2012. So this project came together in, I'm going to say, early 2019, a result of Dave visiting his local a local legislative reception that NABC had hosted, speaking with my predecessor and saying, hey, we'd really like to look into developing a regional malt barley economy, build out a long-term program. Is that something that you can help us with? And David Bauermeister said, yes, absolutely. And the rest, as they say, is history. So a lot of this early work, as you see on this slide, was really around regional interest and capacity for production, along with some projected sales. But one of the things that was lacking was really just a project identity. And that's where NABC came in. I was introduced to the project. We were able to give it a name and form a co-op so that there was a business entity that could house this project. It was a phenomenal experience to watch regional growers come together, make the decision to form a cooperative, and slog through what felt like weeks of bylaw review to get a business entity put together that was capable of housing this project, landing checks. Eventually there was staffing and all those other concerns that come along with any initiative. So the Southwest Washington Growers Co-op is a farmer-owned cooperative. It was incorporated in late 2019. It currently has, Jake, check me if I'm wrong, I think 37 members total.
That sounds really accurate, yeah.
And because it includes both the grain pool and a food hub. And I want to say there are, I'm going to say there are about 20, or sorry, there are about 12 to 14 grain producers and probably 25, give or take, food hub members. And some of these individuals cross that line. The mission of the co-op is to increase the viability of Southwest Washington family farms through collaborative opportunities in marketing, logistics, and stewardship. It's a healthy organization. It's got good membership right now. The board is functioning. And I think this December, actually, I'd almost have to check my calendar, would be the 5th anniversary of the co-op. Don't get here alone. The partnerships that made this project possible, I think, early shout out, and we need to revise some of these slides, but WSEA was instrumental in providing funding for NABC to assist in moving this initiative forward. WSU and the Thurston County Economic Development Center were Economic Development Council were early adopters and along for the ride from the very beginning, as was the Port of Chehalis. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Valley Agronomics and Great Western. Valley for lending labor and some transportation and logistics support to the project, and Great Western Malting for working with us to build out that commerce. The Port of Chehalis, I think by now Bill Teitzel and others will maybe roll their eyes because Randy, his last name is escaping me. Randy Mueller, thank you. Randy Mueller was a huge proponent of this, suggested that the facility be built out on Port of Chehalis property, and 2 years later took a position with the Port of Ridgefield, is that right? Leaving a sizable project in the capable hands of Lindsay Center and Bill Teitzel. I know that Bill's joined us today. Great to have you here, Bill. I mentioned also Talking Cedar Brewing, that brewing and distilling was located in Grand Mound. They came in a little bit later in the project and became the Growers Co-op's first business-to-business sale of regional grain. And the Southwest Washington Growers Co-op itself was, never forget this initiative is really a combination of 14 individual mid-tier grain producers growing out wheat, barley, and oats on occasion, along with some dry peas currently in this area. The early funding again, WSEA supporting NABC to in turn support agriculture in Southwest Washington. The Port of Chehalis stepped in and dedicated acreage on port property to build out this facility. The group rallied and petitioned I often get this wrong, but they were distressed counties, Lewis County Distressed Counties Funds, the 09 committee, I think it is called, and the group won $800,000 to place a rail spur on port property. NABC got a rural business development grant for some early planning. You can see one of the exhibits from that early planning here in this slide. And then a second rural business development grant to build out a phased construction plan, along with the geological survey and the engineer's report, and all those the other things that come along with this, that sort of soft side of getting these projects done, permitting, etc. The grain facility, phase 1 is funded through a capital budget request, and NABC continued through a rural cooperative development grant to support the project through, gaining funding and moving that planning forward along with port staff. The project later, we refer to the EDA CARES grant as the boomerang grant. It felt like we'd get it off a desk, we'd get it submitted, and then it would come back for greater clarification. It would resubmit, and it would come back for greater clarification. That felt as though it went on for several years. As a matter of fact, I think it did go on for several years. But that was eventually awarded to the Port of Chehalis for just over $4 million. And the project also recently enjoyed an award in community funding from Marie Glusenkamp Perez's office for an additional $4 million. So thanks to the continued support and engagement of the regional agricultural community, the support of so many important and influential partners in putting this together, and the support of state, local, and federal governance in supporting the project financially, construction should be starting this winter. I'm going to turn it over to Jake here, who'll take over in terms of talking about the production side of things. And thank you very much for your time. I'll look forward to your questions here in a few minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the slide we're looking at right now shows a little bit of kind of a synopsis for each of the rows. Starting on the left side with 2020, you'll see underneath variety, we've got two varieties there. One is listed as Thunder and one is Connect. Those are both varieties of barley. One is planted in the fall, that would be the Thunder, it's known as a winter variety. And then you have Connect, which is planted in the spring variety. So if you just kind of look at the totals there in that second column under acreage, you can see that first year we had 178 acres of malting barley that were being grown under contract for Great Western. And as Mike noted earlier, we do have some other contracts and opportunities to grow some feed grains and stuff. So far up to this point, our largest contracts and purchaser of the grain out of the region has been Great Western. So when you see these numbers as we move through the years, we're really focusing on that malting barley, as that was our largest crop that was being grown. So if you just kind of look there to the tons to the acre, that would be the far right column there in 2020, and it shows on that winter barley we saw 3.36 tons to the acre. And Connect, we saw 2.57 tons to the acre. And it's kind of important to watch those numbers and just see, because we'll see a percent change as we go across in the years here. In 2021, we did see that Thunder barley, we had a reduction in our yields, but we were still over 3 tons to the acre. And then down on the Connect, we were down a little bit there, almost 8% as well, but still well over 2 tons to the acre. But also note what the total acreage did that year, and that'd be the far left column there in the 2021. We jumped up to 391 acres. So we pretty much doubled and plus a little bit there on our acreage from 20 to 21. And then as we move forward to 22, you can see the acres jumped up to 688. We're gaining a little bit of momentum, some more interest from producers in the community and wanting to get in. And you can see there the tons, that center column there. We hit 1,431.15 tons of malting barley that were grown or under contract in Southwest Washington. If you go to the next column, though, you'll see the tons per acre. And in 22, we had some different weather, and we saw a pretty significant reduction in the tons per acre on the thunder barley. It was down almost 40% to the acre. And we were down almost a little over 9%, not quite 10 on the connect. So important to understand that, you know, Southwest Washington is not, or historically is not known for growing volumes of grain. And, you know, we've had a pretty good run of things there, but there are some times weather events that step in. Moving up to 2023 last year, you'll see that we increased our total acreage up to 1,000 acres. So once again, gaining some traction, increasing those contracts for malting barley with Great Western. And we saw a good increase there on the percentage, that's year to year on the yields tons per acre. But once again, we're back up around almost 2.5 on that winter planted variety and 2.4 on the spring planted variety. So just kind of shows you how things can fluctuate a little bit from year to year. And that takes us up through 23. So we can go ahead and go next slide. And this one here, may be a little bit harder to see, but you have the connect barley is in that yellowish color, and the more orange one is the thunder barley. And so, excuse me, thunder, it shows what we did. I gotta actually zoom in a little bit. Oh, acres and tons. So if you go to the right side there under 2023, and you'll see the thunder barley, the acres and tons were down significantly from the year before. And the reason that happens, the thunder barley, as I mentioned earlier, is a winter variety. And so we plant it in the fall, and then we wait and see how much it rains, how high the water gets, how severe is the winter. And we had a situation there where we'd had, you know, a pretty bad winter, and we didn't have a lot of it survive. In 24, we did have some more winter barley that was planted. So it's one of those cycles, you know, trying to figure out what soil types we have in different valleys that can withstand wintering a winter barley. And when we talk about, you know, this Southwest region, a lot of this barley is grown in the greater Chehalis River Valley, which starts west of Chehalis about 15 or 20 miles above the town of PL and up above the Boisert Valley, and then empties out in Grays Harbor County down at Aberdeen. So a very long watershed that does span over multiple counties. And, you know, that's kind of our weather patterns can vary from one valley to the next as well. So we can go ahead and go next slide. So this is looking back at what we just saw of that 2020 through 2023 is the top piece there that shows what those yields look like, the total acres that were planted, and then down below in the bigger box, we've got the 2024 data. And I changed things a little bit. So in the second row there, it says AP and AH. AP is for acres planted and AH is for acres harvested. And it was especially important to understand that this year, because if you drop down to the bottom row, you'll see that between those two varieties of barley, we planted 1,268 acres and we harvested 410. And when I say we harvested 410, we harvested 410 acres that met the specifications of the contract for Great Western Malting. So, you know, a typical scenario would be in early quarter one of the year, January, February of the year, Great Western would come and say, hey, we want a contract for X amount of barley this year. Here's what the discount schedule looks like. And we'll talk a little bit more about discount schedule, but one thing I would like to note in 24 is you go over to the tons per acre, you'll see that we were up over 3 on that thunder barley. That's the top one there at 26.87%. So a very good yield in 2024 on the thunder barley. And then on the connect barley, as far as what was harvested in that specification, we were only down 0.29%. So really still had very good yields on those, but we did have some product that did not meet specification under the contract. So we can go next slide. And for those of you that were in Western Washington in August of 2024, we had a little bit of an event that carried on for about 7 or 10 days. We had more rain than we'd seen in the month of August in quite a few years. I went with Olympia, kind of a central location in the region, and they recorded that they had 1.38 inches of rain in the month of August. You know, some areas recorded more than 2 inches. Where I was at the time, about 10 minutes out of Chehalis, we had everything from hail to downpours. It was in August, like I can't remember or hadn't seen in a long time. The result of that, and you see there in the picture on the right, is a field of malting barley that lodged. So lodging is when you get enough weather, whether it's wind, rain, whatever, but it forces the barley to tip over or lay flat in some situations to where it's not efficiently harvested as it would be if it was freestanding. You run some other risks once the barley lodges, especially if your weather stays in the pattern that we experienced this year. So we received all that rain within a couple of days, but we had a weather pattern that hung around for about 10 days where we stayed overcast and humid, and that moisture never really left. It was underneath this barley that was lodged, which then started to compound some of the issues we had with harvesting the barley. So we can go next slide at this point. And is what you're looking at here is the head of the barley before it's been combined. On the left side, you can see those little nodes that are kind of curling like the shape of a C coming out of the kernels themselves. And that is barley that has begun to sprout. So when you're selling barley into a malting market, not an expert on the malting of barley, but I can kind of give you the Reader Digest real condensed version, is they want barley that has not germinated. They initiate germination under a controlled environment, and then they immediately stop the germination to lock the sugars and starches where they are in the product. It's really a one and done. So when we start to see barley that started the germination process, well, in this situation, it's actually started to sprout. The labs that we worked with this summer said, once you see the sprout, you can assume that you're at least 30% started germination in the field. So the germination can start and not be visible to the naked eye, they say, for 3 to 5 days. So this one's obvious that they're sprouting. They call this pre-sprout in the field. And well, I was talking about the discount schedule under contract with Great Western. The producers or the co-op as a whole are allowed 5% of their crop to be into start of the germination phase. And when we see a sprout like this, you're rest assured you're already at 30%. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. It's very similar, but it's going to show you some more barley. And some of this came out of the Centralia, Chehalis, Boisford area, and some came from that Grace Harbor, Elma, Satsep, Brady area. Same thing here. You can see some very obvious sprouting that's taken place. And some of this barley wasn't lodged either. We actually had barley that was still standing, that hadn't laid over, but there was enough moisture that we'd experienced. And then with that cap of overcast weather that we had in the region, and it was really all of Western Washington, not just isolated to Southwest, it really gave this grain that we did not want to germinate an opportunity to germinate when it was still standing in the field. So now we can go next slide. And we'll go back and we'll talk a little bit more about that 2024 harvest. And you can see there that the acres planted, we had 1,268 planted, 410 were harvested prior to this weather event that we're speaking of, which is about 67% of the malting barley that was planted in the region this year did not meet specification for the contract it was planted under. And when you jump down to the table at the bottom there, you'll see the acres that were damaged or lost. And I wanted to clarify there that some were lost and some were damaged. And on the Connect, that was the spring planted stuff. It was damaged by the weather that we had in August. If you go down to the bottom row and you see there's thunder barley, and that was planted in the fall of 2023 to be harvested in the summer of 24. There's 55 acres there that were lost. And those 55 acres were lost to excessive watering. It all drowned out in the winter of 23 and 24. So those 55 acres never got to see the summer of 24. But if we jump over there to the second to the last column on the right titled revenue lost, I think this is an important thing to understand. The weather pattern that we experienced lost about $471,642 on the spring planted barley and just under 40,000 on that winter planted barley. And you know, these are estimates, and they will always be estimates. We'll never have finalized numbers because when you look up at the top and you see the tons per acre, those ton per acre values are based on what was harvested and what met contract. What didn't meet contract, if you go back down to the bottom where it says revenue recovered, you know, I've got 300,000 plus or minus and a question mark at the top of that column, because on the co-op side of things, we had obtained or secured a contract for barley that met specification for Great Western. We didn't have a secondary market contract or an outlet through the co-op to move that 858 acres of connected barley that did not meet specification. We did eventually have multiple outlets for that. One of the bottlenecks we ran into, if you will, was where do you put 858 acres worth of barley that doesn't meet specification, because the malting barley was being loaded directly into rail cars. So a lot of that product that was harvested that didn't meet specification, we were scrambling to figure out where to store it. Some was stored in commodity barns, or even concrete slabs for old silage pits on farms. And then it was really at the discretion or the responsibility of the producer to help find a home for it. In the co-op, we worked together, but it was a very large volume of grain that didn't meet the specification that needed another home. So that 300,000 number is there with the question mark because one, we don't know how many tons of barley ended up on those concrete slabs that we weren't able to put in rail cars. And depending on who the producer was that had the grain and which outlet they found for it, the price they received per ton varied pretty significantly. So that's kind of we'll never have the whole story on what the yields were because we were scrambling to get the product harvested out of the fields and dumped. Those trucks were never weighed. So the producers that have taken that or that had that product that have sold it in other markets, they do receive weights as they sell it, but not all of that barley has been cleared out of barns yet. There's still a fair bit that'll move out over the next few months. So I think we can go next slide. And so this one here demonstrates, you know, what our payments were to producers over the years. So you can see in 2020, we were around 105,000, 21, we were 211,000, 22, 464,000, and 23 was just like $752,000. And we were anticipating in 2024, we were going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $737,000 in producer payments to the grain growers for their crop. Now, if you've been paying real close attention to the acreage, you'll be like, wait a second, Jake, we were up in acreage this year. Why wouldn't we be up in revenue? And the price of commodities, grain is included, fluctuates from year to year. So we did see about a 30% reduction in the price that producers were paid for their malting barley between a 2023 and a 2024 harvest. So had we seen the price of malting barley that was offered to the producers sustained from 23 to 24, that yellow column that you're looking at there would have been probably in excess of $1 million. But we saw that 30% cut in the offered price, and so it got us down to about 737. And if you go down to the left of that yellow column there, the kind of dismal 2024 orange column you see is what we actually ended up making in producer payments on malting barley this year. So about $256,000 to that group of, I believe we had 9 growers growing the malting barley under contract. So a pretty stark difference there of about $500,000. And the question is, how much of that was recovered through secondary markets? We had everything from commodity brokers that bought some of that barley. It went to Eastern Washington. We had local dairies, we had local feed mills that was able to scoop up some of that grain, but we had a lot of it to deal with. So I think we can go next slide after that one. And so the path forward, like what could have made this year, how could we reduce the impact on producers in the region moving forward? Lessons learned. We ended up with a product that we had no place to go because we were loading the barley that was under contract or into rail cars. And when we had product that no longer met those specifications, it kind of turned into a fire sale. We had to find a home. We had to do something with it. We had to do something quick. So one of the opportunities that we'll have moving forward, thanks to the Port of Chehalis and their diligence in moving forward with developing a grain handling and storage facility, is we could have segregated that grain that did not meet specification into bins, and we could have taken time to determine what markets we're going to sell it in and when we were going to do it. We were put in a position where, like I say, we had to fire sale some stuff that went into rail cars, that went into Eastern Washington commodities that did not pay good dividends to the producers. So with the port and their project, Mike already touched a little bit on, the EDA CARES funding, the community funded projects. That's the funds that are coming through Congresswoman Camp-Prez's office. Additional capital, for grain in the region. The cooperative, more membership, more growers, more people interested in participating. Other things, obviously grants through WSDA, USDA, other private nonprofits that offer funding or support for this type of work. Current markets, malting barley, to date, it's been the biggest market that we've dabbled in. Distilleries probably have been number 2. That was a little bit light this year in comparison to the last couple years. Feed mills. This year, feed mills were probably a second, if not a first, in who purchased most of our grain. And a little bit of that was under contract with the Growers Co-op prior to this weather. The Growers Cooperative had some peas and some other barley that was already contracted to feed mills. And then seed crops. We do have numerous producers within the co-op who are growing peas and other vegetables for seed under other contracts. So those are some current markets. What type of new markets are we looking at? We've got identity preservation. This is a product that's grown in the Pacific Northwest or the Chehalis River watershed. And, there's some very unique things about the region. Local brewers, distillers, getting them interested in purchasing the product. There's always an opportunity for that. Additional products, when we're looking at new markets, we would love to see a flour mill in the region, that could handle a large volume of product, or, even if it's not in our neighborhood, how can we get commodity there? And when we have the support of an entity like the Port of Chehalis and the grain handling and storage facility, it's going to create some new opportunities. Right now we do have a fair bit of wheat that's grown in the area, but it all has to be trucked down to Portland or the Dalles, whichever, elevator is currently receiving it. In the future, with help from the Port of Chehalis, we'll have local storage where that commodity can go, and then over the course of the winter, it can be trucked or shipped via rail to any of those locations. So always looking at new crops. We're looking for new, as Mike indicated earlier, business to business type transactions. And, this year was not quite as successful as we hoped it would be as far as the sales. The crop was still there. We still harvested a large volume. It just had to go into a secondary market. So we're better preparing for those type of events through lessons learned this year. Next slide. And, opportunity moving forward, what crops exist. We've obviously already talked about wheat, barley. Mike mentioned oats. We've grown peas for seed and peas for feed. We've grown rye. We've discussed options around canola, other products. Agronomists at Valley Agronomics have definitely weighed in, helped us navigate that a little bit, trying to figure out what options are feasible for our region. And then, you move into the facility here. This is one of those engineering drafts that Mike mentioned earlier that I believe, Mike, that was out of the RCDG.
Yep.
Where there was some funding that supported some of these initial illustrations to give us an idea of what we're looking at. And this is actually really close to the project that's moving forward at the Port of Chehalis now. But we'll have that grain storage. We could potentially have cleaning. Eventually we could potentially have the capacity to dry. And that's product that is being harvested and potentially leaving the region. But we can also have incoming commodities, meaning we still have a number of organic dairies that are in the region. We don't have a lot of organic grain that's grown in the region. If you're operating with robotic milking machines, you require some specialty grain in some situations. And we could get that commodity to agriculture producers in the region cheaper if we could bring it in via rail and then offload it into bins, offload it into their trucks so they can take it back to the dairy. So there's, you got to think of this opportunity that's being presented by the Port of Chehalis as a two-way street. We definitely want to export product, but we also have the ability to receive product there. Access to new markets, we were just talking about that. We're currently in a situation where all the product that we're harvesting in that late July and the early September window has to go somewhere immediately because we've got nowhere to store it. When the Port of Chehalis completes this project, there'll be an opportunity to hold some of that, sell into some of those niche markets, more business to business, and it'll insulate us a little bit from the volatility. Typically a lot of your commodities bring the lowest price at harvest because everybody has an abundance of it. If you can store that product for a little bit and then move it, a lot of times you can do a little bit better. So that'll help there. Identity preservation, we already touched on that a little bit. We're very unique here west of the Cascade Range in our weather patterns and crops that we are able to grow. And we get down to, who does this benefit? And there's, some local industry there, but I think the real thing to acknowledge is how does it benefit the regional economy? Because, when you start looking at, yes, farmers, ranchers, dairy, poultry, baking, brewing, distilling, the Washington State Department of Agriculture has their farmer school grants that the school districts apply for. How do we get them a local product? Well, we support the farmers, we support the ranchers. That could not just be the grain that's being grown, but it could be a product that's coming in to feed those animals. We've got a lot of poultry operations that are especially in Southwest that could benefit from this. And then brewing and distilling. The Pacific Northwest has got a reputation, if you will, for our craft brewing and distilling, and we'd like to help them source that locally grown product. So I think we can move on to the next slide, and I think it's going to bring us to a close. So I know I've just kind of skewed a whole bunch today. We've still got a little bit of time. I'd welcome, Mike or Dave here with me to add to anything I've touched on. Dave, you have the microphone.
Jake was way too kind to Burlington Northern Railroad. If Burlington Northern had delivered the cards when they were promised and ordered, virtually all of that barley would have been combined before the rain started, and none of the losses would have happened. And that's the value of having a large storage, is when your crop is ready, you can harvest it and get it out of the weather. And that's why this is so important.
Yeah, that's a point well taken. I think too, the only thing that I would add is when I started in on this project, I think about 20 minutes after starting research on small grains, I ended up reading about global commodities markets. The reach of projects like this and the importance of providing infrastructure for mid-tier agriculture where you're not moving 120 rail cars or storing in the millions of bushels is very important. And it doesn't only benefit, as Jake was pointing out, those individuals engaged or adjacent to agriculture, but it's even further reaching. These dollars circulate within our communities. The Chehalis Valley, where we're located currently, has several tractor dealerships, for example. There are regional fabricators and agronomy centers that all benefit from a vibrant regional agricultural economy. And this is just one way to help preserve that. Consolidation is the norm in agriculture and all other things today. And these cooperative ventures that pull resources and pull people together are one way for the smaller and mid-tier producers to compete in a world that is constantly shrinking in terms of your number of options.
Bill Teitzel, since you are in the audience and we kind of touched on, the contributions of the Port of Chehalis, would you like to add anything?
Well, appreciate it. No, that was really a good summary of everything. And this project that we're doing for the grain project, Southwest Washington Grain Project, is a cornerstone for a whole bunch of other things we're going to do. We've actually kind of dedicated this portion of the business park. We call it the Marin Road Industrial Site 2. And the first $4 million that we've received from the EDA is, of course, going into the grain project. And so is a portion of the $4 million we received through the community funding process. And so, but some of that funds is also going to be to expand, the infrastructure system so that we can have more agricultural related opportunities out there and kind of keep this as sort of like a hub. And, we really enjoyed working with NABC on this one, and we're really excited to also get the food hub out here at the port. And it's just been great. I can't wait to get into the project. We actually have our pre-construction kickoff meeting this Monday with the engineering company and the contractors. And so I wouldn't doubt that probably here sometime after the first year, you'll see some dump trucks and all sorts of machinery out here at the port starting to work on this during the bad weather, of course. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, absolutely.
This has been, it's an interesting adventure. And it's been wonderful for two reasons. The group of farmers we're working with and the port and their dedicated attitude towards making this happen and helping agriculture.
And I'd like to add, because I can't help myself and I work on the food hub side a lot. Just for everybody's context, the Southwest Washington Growers Co-op has two pools within it. There is the grain pool, which is this project we're talking about now, and then there is the food hub pool. And while that does add a level of organizational complexity, like there's no doubt about it, it does to have two pools in one co-op. I would say the benefit is in years like this year where there was disappointing harvest or disappointing profit on the harvest, we have sort of a buffer in that the food hub is having an extraordinary year. And so it kind of allows us to develop two separate economies, if you will, the food hub side and the grain side, and sort of alleviate some of the risk and expand some of the opportunities. So if anyone has any questions around that part of things too, the cooperative development side, you're in a room with some really capable people to answer those questions. So feel free to ask about any of it.
I've got a question. I've got a
Hey.
question on the secondary market, on the feed market side of things. Hi, Mike, different last name, used to be Hayes. On the,
Hey,
howdy. So yeah, I mean, so some of the dairy guys we work with up here in Whatcom, feed security and access to feed for dairies is definitely, it's on the list. We only have one feed mill left up here in Sumas. If storage did exist, Port of Chehalis, as you're building out, Do you get the sense that there'd be a pretty neat, easy tie-in to some of those secondary markets for some dairy feed security, poultry? Is there a good feed market regionally that would still offer a good price for growers that would also help some of these livestock producers?
Yeah, so I can answer that. I think the answer is yes, because we did have and we were literally cold calling these feed mills, you know, seeing, hey, how much can you take? And they're like, well, only so much a month, right? Most of them don't have the capacity to store a year's worth of product, and they buy, you know, spot price, get a rail car, whatever kind of thing. So, you know, like the illustration that you're looking at right now, those three larger bins that are anticipated, you know, to eventually be there for us, each one of those would hold about 6 rail cars worth of grain. So it'd be very easy for your feed mill operation up there in the northern part of the state to say, hey, you know, we need a rail car in December or January. Can you send us one? And the answer is yes, absolutely. This facility will be located right on the rail spur with the ability to load out in that type of situation, and we can it'll be able, so we can load into rail, but we can also load into truck. So if you're a smaller facility, you know, that's only doing, you know, a single axle dump truck worth, you know, every month or whatever, in theory they could come in and we can fill that truck just as easily. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add quickly to that. You know, I work regionally. NABC is a regional organization. We've been watching. We do the co-op has some members in Skagit County, and I've been in conversation with them, and always have my ear to the ground or one eye open in that community for available rail sidings. I think that there is some opportunity there. It's early in the game to say much more than that, but you know, certainly like Jake pointed out, like I continue to carry the banner for this mid-tier commerce. I was surprised to find that the feed market operated so much on that, you know, like just in time mentality, rather than having significant storage. So yeah, even when you're talking in the thousands of bushels, that could make a big difference and create some real opportunity regionally. I think the other thing to keep in mind is what we jokingly refer to as the urban divide. It's just that, you know, Seattle, Tacoma, and Joint Base Lewis McChord in between these two, you know, active areas of Western Washington agriculture, Skagit, Whatcom, and then a little further south with Clark, Cowlitz, and Lewis and Thurston. So yeah, I'm real excited about what we can do as we build this project out.
And I think I've got one other way I could answer your question there a little bit, and that was that when we had to take the product that didn't meet specification and sell it in the feed market, the producers were receiving about 80% of the value they would have gone to the malting market. And the barley that we didn't have any place to house and we had to load it directly into rail cars brought about 40% of the value that it would have brought in the malting market. So in theory, if we'd been able to store that grain and not immediately put it in rail cars and make it go somewhere else, the producers could have made an extra 40% on that grain by having storage available.
80% is not bad for a feed market. That's super exciting.
I have a question that kind of follows that up, and that is the money that's been received so far, the 4 million, 4.2 million, and perhaps some of the other money, is the money that's available to the storage unit enough to build this out as pictured, or what exactly is going to be built out for storage with that money, and when do you think it'll be ready to use?
I can start on that. So the way we did it is with the EDA funds, because that is the first funding we had, we actually put the 3 large bins that you see on there as alternate items. That means if we have enough money left over, we'd have a number for them to put in there. It all kind of depends on what that number that was given to us and what bid we selected. The way it's working out right now is we don't have enough funds in the EDA money to do all three of those bins, because most of that funding is going to be dedicated to the, you know, the site development, the elevators, and there's the six small bins you see on the left-hand side there. However, I'm actually in discussion right now with the EDA, because typically federal agencies don't like to use money as matches against other federal agencies. And we know that we're not really trying to say this is a match, but we're trying to say, hey, we have the engineering, we want to be efficient with government funding. We have additional funding that's been appropriated to us. Can we utilize this in there with the same contract? And they're reviewing it now. It actually looks fairly positive. I don't have a definitive answer. So if we do get that back, or it's going to work in our favor, we'll probably have these constructed during the same time. And the goal is to have this site up and running and fully completed by the end of July 2025.
Awesome.
I have a question. And if anyone else has one, feel free to interrupt me. But I'm curious. So given the nature of the world, I'm wondering what other, like, if you all decide to pivot and grow other crops, what other types of crops could be stored in these bins?
I really think that, you know, what could be stored in the bins is kind of an endless list, if you will, you know, of any dry grain that you're combining could be. The one thing that, so like those 3 large bins are for one very large bulk commodity. And we talked a little bit earlier about seed crops. And a lot of times you don't necessarily, or you really want to avoid commingling seed crops from one producer to the next, because seed crops tend to be paid based on germination, because they don't want things to germinate and they want a seed that has a high probability of germinating. So the smaller 6 bins that you see on the left side would probably be more suitable for receiving and loading out later seed crops. The big bins would likely tend to be either like a malting product or wheat that's going for flour or export or other feed type grains.
Yeah, well said. I want to add too, though I always feel like I'm getting a little bit ahead, but in the spirit of, you know, Bill's talking about, you know, creating more of like an ag service center and listening to project stakeholders over the years, you might also imagine a facility that has cleaning and drying capacity, because in Western Washington, another issue is always going to be that moisture content of this finished grain, and wanting to diminish that for long-term storage or for export or to meet spec. And then as Jake said, in touching on seed crops, it's certainly true of Skagit, but also true of Southwest Washington, that there are still several active contracts in seed production for radishes, spinach, sunflowers, I saw a year ago or so, and some other crops. So opportunity for not only the storage, but also for those kind of adjacent facilities, cleaning and handling.
Excellent. Well, we've got 1 minute left. So if anybody else has any questions, now's the time. I also encourage you all to please take the evaluation and let us know how we did today. I will pop a link in the chat to that evaluation. And it's very, very quick, essentially just 2 minutes to tell us how we did today. And that helps us keep doing these kinds of things, collect the data that we need. So I will put that in the chat right now, and please fill it out if you're able. It is very quick. Thank you so much for coming. And feel free, Jake put his email in the chat. So feel free to reach out to him with any other questions. That Google link in there is the link to the evaluation. So again, it's 2 minutes. Please fill it out, and thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Emily. Did a great job convening. Thanks everyone for showing up.